It's gone off again. Oh, I haven't switched it on.
The microphone works better if you switch it on. Good. You can tell I run a tech company, can't you? Anyway, I have to give this man the nod when we're ready. Talk amongst yourselves for a bit. I don't even know your name, what's your name? Paul. Paul. Okay, Paul. Are we off? All right. Good evening. Anyway, hello, my name is Pippa Gardner, and I'm CEO of Urban Tide. And I'm in charge of housekeeping for this evening, so I have a clipboard and a pen. I just need a sort of Marshall vest or something, and I'll be filling the part. But anyway, on a serious note, a very, very, very big welcome to our How Data Transforms Cities and Communities event. We're just delighted that so many of you have taken time out of your Tuesday evening to be here. And we're also very delighted to be here as part of DataFest and part of the fringe event of the whole week of data festival events that are taking place, not just across Edinburgh but throughout Scotland this week. So thank you very much for coming. I just wanted to do as well a sort of quick welcome to Codebase. I don't know, are there people here who've never been to Codebase before? There are. Okay, well, big welcome to Codebase. This is the UK's biggest tech incubator. It's 3 years old. It just celebrated its 3rd birthday on Friday there, which was a great occasion. It houses over 80 companies in the sort of creative and tech and digital space. So it's a really important part of the, not just of Edinburgh, but again of Scotland. We've been here for 2.5 years, and it's an incredibly supportive environment for the tech community, and also for funding and raising investment and just generally collaborating. So it's really good to be here, and welcome to Codebase if you've not been before. So just a quick bit about Urban Tide. For those that don't know, our market is smart cities, so we do a lot of work around the data and the engagement piece specifically around smart cities, and for example today we ran a open data training workshop for participants across the public and private sector. But some people who were at that workshop today are actually here tonight as well. I think there's about 3 or 4 that have lasted. Thank you, Lisa's here, Doug. Ollie, I think you're here as well, that have lasted the pace since 9 o'clock this morning, so that's a top effort. But and thank you very much for that. So we're very interested in how data, how rapid urbanisation itself is transforming our cities and communities, and how we as government or as businesses or as individuals are responding to that, to the challenges that faces. So that's why we posed this question, how data transforms cities and communities, and we're delighted that we've got 4 exceptional speakers tonight for you this evening, who are all providing their response to that question. I'm saying exceptional now. We're going to do a vote later and see some sort of clapometer and see how we're going. But no, seriously, the bar was high in terms of speakers, and we are delighted to have our speakers here. So I'll just do a quick introduction to them. We've got Brian McGuigan from Silver Spring Networks. We've got Richie Somerville from City of Edinburgh Council. We should go, hey. We'll start again. We've got Brian McGuigan from Silver Spring Networks here, everybody. Thank you very much. That's great. And then we've got Richie Somerville from City of Edinburgh Council. It's almost like in the red corner. I don't even have that bit written down. And then we've got Chris Hugh from Uber. And then, go Chris. And then last but not least, I hope you get a good round of applause, Toby. We've got our very own Toby Tonner. Okay, so what we're going to do is everybody's going to speak, and then we're going to keep questions to the end. So we'll have an informal Q&A session at the end. So if you can keep your burning questions to the end. You can, of course, heckle the speakers as they go and really do what you like. But that's the plan. Is we'll have 4 speakers, and then we'll have Q&A, and then there's a bit more time for some leftover pizza and the remainder of the beer and soft drinks, so you're welcome to stay networking as much as possible. So I think that I haven't even given you a clap yet, but before we introduce the first of our speakers, I've just got a few others that I'd like to say hello to. So the rest of the Urban Tide team, just to introduce you to. We've got Simon here, he's in charge of the clicker. He does do more than that on a daily basis, but today he's in full charge of the clickers. If it all goes wrong, we know who to blame. We've got Jacek at the back there as well, our senior dev engineer, and Sylvia, dev engineer too. And we've got Rika coming in the door, running about, doing everything. Okay, so actually she deserves a bit of a bit round of applause. In fact, they all do. Second last shout out is to Product Forge, so to Paul over here. So this is being live streamed, so if you'd all like to just say a big hello to our viewers at home. Or who might be watching this afterwards, but it's great. So we've got more people than are just here. And then I'd like to introduce as well, so I mentioned before, this is we're delighted that this is a fringe event as part of DataFest. So I've got Dave Fitch here from Data Lab. We'd just like to say a few words about that before we get started. Yay!
Working well. I bet you can get that clap at all the other events.
This is the bit where I have to say, you probably have noticed, you have a list of exceptional speakers, and I'm not on that list. So I'm going to be short and sweet, honest, I do promise. Can I ask for a quick show of hands? How many of you know about the Data Lab? That's not too bad. I'm going to give you a super quick summary. We are one of the 8 innovation centres in Scotland, and our job is to drive growth, jobs, employment in Scotland through the use of data. We were funded in 2014. The full team started late 2015, and we've basically been running full blast for a year. And I hope some of you will see the kind of things we've been doing to try and make data happen across Scotland. Broadly speaking, we do 3 things. One is we fund projects with industry and academia, because the key thing we do is we don't, although we're based at the University of Edinburgh, we don't fund research. What we do is technology transfer. We want to get ideas out of academia into the real world. We want to actually make data make a difference. So we fund projects, we fund skills. So as some of you know, we run a very large MSc program. We bring together 90 MSc students across 12 universities in Scotland. Next year will be 120 MSc students. We have a PhD program. We have an executive education program. We are starting to do stuff with schools to convince kids that math is actually important. Data actually is cool, believe it or not. I think data is cool, but my daughter doesn't agree with me yet. The other thing we do is community. We focus on trying to develop a data science community in Scotland. Because what we know is Scotland is full of people who are really good at data. And one of the ways that we will make Scotland a leading international data science destination is by bringing everyone together, because we all know the whole is always bigger than the sum of the individual parts. So one of the key things that we've been doing to help bring the community together is DataFest. DataFest has been such a big part of everyone in the Data Lab's life for the last 4 months. It's hard to explain. When I woke up Monday morning, I thought, my God, it's actually going to happen. This is the week. Finally, which is great. Last year we had a 1-day DataFest, and after that we thought we can do bigger, we can do better, we can reach more people, we can actually help people understand the value of data and bring people together. And the vision long term was we would have a week-long festival of data. We would have things across Scotland. We'd have a couple of fringe events, because it's Edinburgh, we should do fringe things. Next thing we knew, we had 26 events across the week. We've got events in Aberdeen, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Ayrshire. We've got school kids, we've got CEOs, we've got IBM, we've got Watson, we've got SMEs, we've got all sorts of people coming in. And I think together it shows the strength of the data science community in Scotland. And I think it's a testament to you all that this has all come together the way it has. It's not a testament to us, it's a testament to all of you. So on that note, I'd like to thank Urban Tide for doing this fringe event, and I will now shut up, and I will now let your distinguished speakers show. Okay.
Okay, so without further ado, I just want to introduce to you Brian McGuigan. So I first met Brian when we were working on the £24 million Glasgow Future Cities Demonstrator Programme. So Silver Springs Networks were part of the intelligent lighting demonstrator there. So that particular project monitored vehicle, bicycle and pedestrian traffic, and also had dimming technology, dimming and increased illumination technology included in it. But Silver Springs Networks are involved in many more smart cities projects across the globe. So without further ado, Brian's going to let us know his lessons to learn from today's smart cities. Big round of applause, please, for Brian.
Excellent. Well, thanks first of all for having me here. And I didn't trust Simon with the clicker. Probably stolen. So, smart cities is one of these terms that actually means 1,000 things to 1,000 people. And actually, I think the definition is continuing to evolve as cities get their heads around what it actually means to them. So today what I thought I'd pick out is just 4 lessons that we're starting to see from some of the projects that, some of the cities rather, that are actually making some progress here. Briefly, kind of who Silver Spring Networks are. So we provide communication and data platforms for cities and utilities to connect up all the stuff that they have spread around that they want to either monitor or connect to or control. And we've got projects now in about 500 cities around the world. And we've mainly, over the last, we're about 13 years old, the headquarters is in the US, and we've mainly kind of focused on assets that kind of really demand reliability. So we started in the smart grid market, and then through cities we're working in things that are maybe tied more to security and those kind of areas. But it's all around this kind of Internet of Things connectivity. So we're not looking at streaming YouTube to mobile phones, but instead connecting up all the devices around a city that need highly reliable connectivity, coverage everywhere in a city, and low cost, or perhaps run on batteries. We handle a huge amount of data through this. We connect, I think, about 25 million devices, and we gather huge amounts of small bits of data from them. So that's who we are. And if we talk about the types of devices that I actually mean when we look at cities, it's a whole range, and it's something that's growing all the time as cities start to learn more. So it's a mix of new equipment they're putting into cities that needs connectivity, so electric vehicle charging points or information panels to help tourists, or it can be old assets that they've had for decades but have never been connected before, like street lights or electricity meters, or they might be connecting up stuff that they've connected before but they want to try and integrate it more with these new assets, so sharing data more across platforms. And this list is constantly growing as cities start to explore how they might use the different data to improve their services for the citizens. So, what are cities actually doing? What are we learning from there? Well, one of the first things that we're seeing kind of come through in the last year or so is that where maybe 5 or 8 years ago, I think there was a view that you might go to one supplier and they would give you a smart city in a box. So, you know, IBM were one of the first to start talking about smart cities, and I think there was a view that actually some of these big organisations would be able to provide that to a city. But increasingly, we're learning that actually that's really not viable, because cities all want something different, and actually need to be tailored for that city. And so, as the kind of innovation cycle is accelerating, we're seeing that actually open ecosystems are coming to the fore. And this is something we've seen in other markets. You know, if you look in the mobile industry, and you go back 10 years, they were dominated by players that would do all of their own in-house development, so very trusted, reliable technology, but they insisted or kind of built their plan around doing their own R&D, and that meant that any innovation was reasonably incremental and relatively slow. Whereas that's now been overtaken by companies that open up their platform and invite third parties to actually innovate on top of it. And clearly that model has been much more flexible and allowed everyone who has the same phone in their pocket to do a whole range of different things with that. And I think we're seeing that trend is now happening in cities where actually it's a collection of companies coming together to build this smart city solution for cities. And that creates some interesting challenges for them as well. And Pippa talked earlier about the Glasgow project, so this is a snapshot of what they look to achieve within the Future City Demonstrator. And one of the parts that we found impressive from the outset was they had 4 different demonstrators. They had the operations centre, they had the data platform, but from the outset it was clear Glasgow wanted this to all really be integrated, and each part to collectively help build and complement each other part. And so we were specifically doing a demonstrator around intelligent street lighting and showing how an intelligent street lighting deployment could actually do a lot more than just energy saving, which is primarily what people look to do with a street lighting upgrade. For those who aren't that familiar with street lighting, it's normally the biggest single component of a city's energy bill. So it can be as much as half of their total spend on energy is on street lighting. And in the last few years, LED technology has come out which can cut that bill in half. So cities around the world are rapidly changing all their lights out to LED, and lots of them are looking at how can they actually use that investment to do more. So here we were deploying a communication network that connects up the lights, but also cameras that were counting vehicles and pedestrians, so they could adjust the street lights in real time when it was busier, and also noise sensors and air quality sensors, so they could feed that into the city open data platform to start getting more value from the system there. And those were the parts that were kind of demonstrated in the project, but there was already an eye on what they might do next. So those same cameras could actually monitor electric vehicle charging bays and tell drivers as they were coming into the city which charging bays were free, or indeed help inform parking companies that do smart parking applications to help you find a parking space quicker. They also looked at making the system available to the emergency services. So if there was a road traffic accident, the CCTV operator could actually turn the street lights up on that street so that the paramedics arriving would be able to treat the patient more easily. And one that I found really interesting, they were looking at how, I think they've identified that the taxi rank outside Central Station in Glasgow can be a flashpoint for fights with the wrong weather conditions and the wrong number of people waiting on a Saturday night. And the police apparently have said they know that if the queue goes past a certain shop, they know that there might be trouble because people are waiting more than an hour, and so they rapidly try and send more taxis. Well, you could have this camera, could automatically detect when that happens and send the taxis perhaps 20 minutes earlier so that you can avoid any upset. So lots of potential extensions that can come from the same kind of building blocks when it's approached flexibly. So one of the challenges that cities are having is they've kind of always been organised in these separate blocks. So there's a roads department, perhaps a separate lighting department, environmental services, and none of these departments typically know each other. They quite often don't work in the same building, and so finding ways to somehow share information or otherwise is a challenge. And so a lot of cities are looking at how can they not just combine budgets, but even just tell each other the problems they're having or the projects they're working on. And that's been recognised as one of the most important things in actually helping any of these smart city initiatives move forward. And different cities are taking different approaches. Some are setting up dedicated innovation areas so they can kind of invite these different parties to come in almost neutral ground and do some experiments. Some are more pragmatic. So in Paris, for example, they had a procurement that was running for a network for street lighting and one that was running for traffic signal control. So they just combined those two together, knowing that having a combined procurement meant it would naturally be more flexible and more versatile. And now they're using that platform to connect about 180,000 lights across the city, but then also a range of other assets and other systems they're starting to use to try and improve different services around the city. And Bristol is Open is an initiative that's based in Bristol that's looking to do something similar. They recognised they were consistently rolling out communication networks for different Internet Things type or smart city projects, and so they proactively raised some money from government to put networks in first and make sure that they were open and flexible, and part of that was so that Bristol could really grow its digital economy and try and establish a leadership position in the IoT market, and that's part of their aim. Another thing I think that's been recognised is that becoming a smart city isn't a one-time process. It's not something you can kind of probably an aim you could ever reach, in fact, and instead it's more a kind of changed mindset and a way of operating that cities need to do. So they're planning that systems will grow in functionality over time. So it's quite hard to predict what you're going to need in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, but they're increasingly building in the capability systems can be upgraded. They're choosing standards so that they know there can be more suppliers that can interoperate and work on the same systems. They're trying to change the way that they work with suppliers as well, so that it's more of a collaboration. In part linked to the first point that most suppliers don't have the complete picture. They need to hear from cities what they're actually looking for and which suppliers they should be working with. And that's kind of a change in mindset for many cities. An example we had in Copenhagen, we're providing again a street lighting control system for the city, and they recognised this was slightly at odds with their cycle initiatives. So they are turning lights down late at night to save energy, but at the same time they're trying to promote more and more people to cycle to work for health and congestion reasons. And so we linked up with the provider of the traffic control system and put some additional sensors in that would monitor the bike lanes, so that as cyclists set off from the traffic lights, the street lights above them turn up again. So it's simple interventions, but they can start to make the whole thing add up to achieve all the different aims a city's looking for. And some of these things are being looked at a city level, so it can't. We think things like security and privacy are quite hard to evolve kind of organically, because they're quite hard to fix later if you've maybe not done the right plans up front. And so we see Internet of Things security starting to become higher profile, and sadly part of that really is triggered by the fact that we're actually starting to see incidents, so people are now having systems hacked, and there's lots of examples of different IoT applications that are now being compromised, and it's quite often being said, why would someone want to hack a street lighting system, or why would someone want to hack an air quality monitor system, so maybe security isn't so important. But the reality is people will always find a reason to do it, even if it is just for their own entertainment, as much as anything else. And so increasingly that's becoming a higher priority. And the final trend is that we're seeing, which I think is a very positive thing, is that kind of we, the citizens of a city, are being put more and more at the front of thinking as to why these services are being changed and why the technology is being put in the first place. Where 5-6 years ago, a lot of the demonstrators were just about showing that the technology could work. Now it's much more tied to actually what value it brings to people. So, we're seeing new systems roll out, so cities can change the way they interact with their citizens. Even if it's finding out where potholes are in the road, or I think in Moscow they have a similar system where around 50% of the population have this app on their smartphone, and they can actually push out to a neighbourhood, which would you like fixed? Would you like this pothole fixed, or would you like this something else fixed? And people will vote on it. I'm not sure necessarily that would work here, but you're seeing cities starting to kind of experiment with that. And the definition of thinking about every citizen, we're involved in the biggest street lighting project in the world in Florida, which is over 500,000 street lights, and they're rolling them out over 2 years, so it's a huge logistic challenge. But within that, there was 637 lights that were of particular interest that we spent a lot of time on, and that's because they were in the breeding areas of these turtles. And I don't know if anyone saw the Planet Earth 2 recently, that kind of highlighted the issue that turtles navigate by the moon, and so when they're born, if there's street lights are too bright, they'll go the wrong way and end up trying to cross the road. So they've put in place a special control system so that on the days when the eggs are hatching, the lights will automatically dim down. So trying to kind of, again, extend the value beyond just the core energy saving. So the last slide tonight was one about remembering cities have to be fun as well, and this was a project from Bristol, part of the Playable Cities initiative, where streetlights around the city were actually hijacked, and they put a camera and a high-definition projector in there without announcing to anyone. And so as people walked across, their shadows from the previous people were replayed, and after some confusion, they found that in these dark alleys of the city that people were now dancing and playing and looking to try and see what they could do with these shadows as they were emerging. Yeah, made for some interesting times. And Playable Cities is actually a great initiative. They've really tried to apply this principle of addressing challenges in different ways, with a focus on fun in cities, because that's actually, no one really wants the dystopian view of cities that a lot of sci-fi films will put out. So this is fortunately another important thing within cities going forward. So that's me. So thanks very much.
With the shadow of the previous person.
That's
Is that
right,
what they were doing? Okay. I mean, streetlights are fascinating. I think Bristol also did a project called Hello Lamppost, I think, as well, where you could ask a lamppost a question, and it was through QR codes, I think, and the lamppost would deliver back a question, because they're everywhere. It's such an asset in the city. And Bristol did this. Is it called the slip slides or whatever they did? Which I think, Rich, is it coming to Edinburgh? Did I read that or did I make that up in a dream?
No,
And there's good.
I think it's coming.
You know, so Bristol did down a high street or whatever equivalent in Bristol where you could actually slide down. This has got nothing to do with data, by the way. But anyway, I heard it's coming to Edinburgh in the summer. So there we go. Sorry, I forgot to introduce you. I've got some notes. Right, here we go. This is Richie, Innovation and Futures Manager at the City of Edinburgh Council. So Richie's developed the Council's ICT and digital strategy for Edinburgh, and fosters innovation in the council and in the wider city, so including establishing the Edinburgh Living Lab, and also works with the Scottish Cities Alliance and the other 6 cities within Scotland on their digital programme, which there's some exciting stuff happening there. So Richie and I are both involved as well in the City Standards Institute, which is a collaboration between the British Standards Institution and the Future Cities Catapult, trying to establish and foster smart city standards and data standards across the world. So there's some exciting stuff happening in that space. So Richie, I love this. I love the title of it. I thought it was great. So if this is the answer, what was the question? Over to Richie.
Thank you, Pippa. So I'm going to be slightly contrary in terms of what I'm looking at, which is my role is often helping people who don't understand how technology works to understand how it works, so that they can adopt it and feel comfortable adopting it. And one of the questions that's struck me when Pippa emailed me, and then emailed me again, and I think emailed me a third time within an hour to say, are you going to do this, was are we creating cultures that are ready for data? Which might seem a slightly strange thing to ask, but move on. I suppose the thing for me in all of this is we have produced data for centuries, and we've codified it and done lots of interesting things with it. But we've had time to adapt and adopt. And what's increasingly happening, as I see it, and actually it probably links to what Brian was talking around about street lights and the pressure to save money on just the lighting rather than thinking about the future, is that the pace or the pressure that certain people feel to make decisions isn't giving them the time to think about what they might do with data, and it's data, not information, and how we ensure that the applications we have for the data match the visions that people are creating. So, a bit of a story. Data is all around us. I've been working on trying to get public body to make as much of its data open as possible for the last 4 years? 4 years, if I remember correctly. Getting started was easy because we had certain data that was already public and was easy to convert into open data standards and follow the good work of the ODI and produce that and get people playing with it and get some engagement that allowed people to understand value. But what was interesting was that often the people that created the data or curated the data, so the services themselves, often struggled to see the value in the data that they had being available for others to use and manipulate. Because they were living in a culture which I suppose in a political context, which is, I'm not allowed to make too many mistakes, and if we get too many potholes, that's a problem, and if we've got air quality that's not quite right, how are we going to deal with it? Or if we've got too many of the wrong decisions, how are we going to deal with that? So there was, not individuals, but collectively, there was a culture that is slightly constrained by what it means to make data freely available and then start to engage in. It's not for me to solve the problem, it's how I work with someone or how someone could help me. So for me, I think there's a big challenge for us between all the great minds in this room, data scientists, etc., and more traditional, particularly mature organizations, to help them understand how to decouple from some of that constraint and understand that sharing is a good thing and that collaboration can actually lead to interesting answers and results. And I use this, so anyone know what this is? Any guesses? So that's a graph theory diagram, and that's a performance pie chart. What most public bodies are held to account for is a pie chart. How are we doing? How many people did or didn't do something? The reality is, for most of the really, really tricky, knotty issues that we have in society, you need to understand it through something like graph theory, because you need to understand the correlations, the connections, the links, the things that you didn't understand as being connections, but they're there, but they're hidden in the data. But to get someone to go and explore, because that's an exploration, rather than go for a destination, is a really, really difficult journey to take people on, because they have to want to do it. Because unfortunately, although hierarchies can instruct and command and control works to a certain threshold, it will never be sustainable if that is what they believe is right, and they find this slightly confusing and baffling. The reason I use graph theory is, as an example, is I was listening to some of the guys at Just Giving who are looking at how they can have more impact in the giving that people are doing, because they know that people want to give, and they've been applying graph theory to the way that they front up the information on when you've made that charitable donation, what do you see next? Because they're looking at all the correlations of all the data connected to the transaction you've done, which is everything from who you're supporting, where you're from, what the charity is you're supporting, who else in your postcode or your data zone has also made that, and they're using all of that data to try and understand how they project things back to you. And that's great, because that's their job. But if you think about that from a public policy perspective, if I'm trying to address underlying issues that are affecting why people are making decisions that are not necessarily always in their own best interests, and how I can intervene in what might be a 5, 10, 15-year conversation with them to lead different lives, I need it to be that complex, because to be honest, the experience they have is that complex. So that was my first thing. The second thing, and again it plays to Brian, honestly, we didn't share these slides beforehand. A lot of smart city work, a lot of tech work that's happening at the moment has been very technology-led rather than data-led. The way I've always described to people is the technology is the vehicle, the data is the thing that allows me to do something. So I can use sensors to go and collect data, but the data is the thing that actually gives me value. That's where all the value is. And whilst, so I was recently giving a presentation to some of our health and social care colleagues around Amazon Echo, and how we might use that to help people who are at home to be slightly more independent if we could connect to the API, because we could then use it for doing things like pill prompts. So rather than someone having to get someone to come out to their house and make sure they've taken a pill, Alexa can say, have you taken your pill today? If you say no, or if you don't answer appropriately, or if you don't answer full stop, that then sets the trigger. It's the data that's really important, not the device. The device, to be absolutely honest, something will come along next year and surpass it. Probably Google Home, if you believe hype. It's how we move away from the technology being the focus to it being about the data and the impact. And again, that's a cultural thing. So, again, it's about the journey. This is not something we do once. So for me, what I've experienced is that lots of people see some smart city things or things around data as being about very fixed points in time, rather than realizing that they are just the next node on a journey that you're going on. Every time we deploy something, almost instantaneously, it's slightly redundant because someone else will have come up with something even more interesting. Having a very similar conversation around smart lighting recently with some colleagues about that idea that the light, that physical asset in the street, is no longer just the thing that holds the light up. It could also be the thing that allows us to understand lots of other conditions around that space and how we manage them more effectively. But I've got to take them on their journey from being lighting engineers to potentially being sensor managers, or from being roads engineers to being total place managers, in a way that they are comfortable with. Because if they're not comfortable, if they don't see it as being of value and important, once I walk out of the room, they've all gone, well, that was really interesting, Richie tells a good story, but we're going to go back and do what we were doing before. So for me, there's a bit about how we reinforce and support people to understand value in a way that allows them to move beyond us, rather, so we're not pulling them and encouraging them, and at some point I'm trying to catch up with them, hopefully, because they'll have progressed to a point where they see the real value and want to move on. And this was really just to highlight the complexity of the environment we work in data. I can't remember exactly who did this, because these are all referenced, so there is a tag underneath. This was someone who looked at data science jobs and mapped them like they were the London Underground. So if I'm trying to help a mature organisation to understand how to adjust and adapt to data, it's quite complex to then say to them, well, you could do this or you could do that. But at its heart, there are some very basic things. So you have visualization, you have the way that you capture data, you have the toolbox of things you use to manipulate the data. There's what you do with it. Is it big data? Is it small data? I'm seeing a huge amount of focus moving from big data, because actually we don't have enough data for it to be big, really, in some service areas, to actually being about small data. It's about very, very narrow interactions we're having with people and understanding those with a much finer degree of accuracy, so that we can work out what it is that they want from us and how we can support that. I won't quite move on to that. I suppose my message to us all is, I think, for me, data is the future, in as much as it is the lifeblood that's going to help us make informed and better decisions about how our cities operate. But we need to ensure that those of us who are at the vanguard and get it all occasionally stop, turn around, find someone who isn't, and have a conversation with them to help them understand, not from our perspective, but from their perspective, why are they not seeing it, and how do we help them get there? So, thank you.
That looks like your graph theory slide, actually, doesn't it? I don't have the graph theory, but I like it. But it's an important point that came up a lot today in the Open Data Workshop as well, around the cultural journey that people have to take with data, and how it can be very overwhelming. But even just making small steps in the right direction or in a forward direction can prove and deliver significant benefit. So look forward to some questions on that. Okay, here's Chris. Okay, so I first knew of Chris in his role as Director of Digital Participation at SCVO, which is Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations. So he was leading work to help everyone in Scotland to benefit from the internet and to boost digital capability in Scotland's third sector. And now he's General Manager at Uber. So that was quite a jump. So I'm interested to find out more about that. Has anybody not heard of Uber? Right, I don't need to. I'm a big fan. I've used Uber quite a lot in 3 different continents, which is one of its definite selling points. So Chris is going to talk about the future of urban mobility. So big hand for Chris, please.
Okay, cool, thank you. An immediately actionable smart cities tip for you, if you want to avoid the bus stop in a taxi queue, there's this amazing smartphone app that you can try. Okay guys, so I'm going to do a couple of things. One is tell you a bit about Uber and what we've been up to. And the second is tell you a bit about the future of cities from our perspective. And what you'll see is that data underpins all of this, which is why we're so pleased to be here along for the session today. I'm going to go really quickly through this bit since you all know what Uber is, and hopefully lots of you have tried it. But for those who've never ridden on Uber before, it's a smartphone app. You open the app and we know where you are because you've got GPS in your phone, which is amazing. And we ask a simple question, which is, where do you want to go? You pop that in, and then we show you a couple of options in terms of the type of car that you want to take you there. And you see some really useful information, like how much it's going to cost and how long before the car will come and get you. And then when you hit request, you get the information that you need to know that your car is on its way, who's going to be driving it. And we now do some really great stuff to make sure that while you're on the trip as well, you get loads of cool information coming to you. If you're in London, the thing you should try is Uber Eats integration, which if you swipe up on the feed, you'll see Uber Eats in there, and you can order food while you're on the Uber trip. And then when you step out of the car at your destination, someone will arrive and hand you your dinner. And it is epic. Right, so let's talk about data for a second. So this, it hasn't come out that well on the screen, but this is what Edinburgh looks like to those of us who work at Uber. This is what a couple of days looks like from sometime last month. And those of you who know Edinburgh can have loads of fun and games made to try and spot all the points of interest and where's the airport and where's the hospital and this kind of stuff. But the point is, we know an awful lot about how cities move based on the data that we gather from the apps that are running on our platform. And that tells us an awful lot about what's going on, how the city's changing, and what we can learn from it. If you zoom out, this is what the planet looks like if you work at Uber. So Uber is in 450 odd cities around the world, which is pretty spectacular. It means you can step off a plane pretty much anywhere, and if you've got your smartphone, you can get where you need to go. You don't need to speak local language, you don't need any money in your pockets, you do need to know where you're going. This actually is a visualization from one of our internal tools that we use on New Year's Eve. And New Year's Eve is a massive night for Uber because it's the busiest night of the year by far for people wanting to use taxi and private hire. And of course, guess what? All of that demand comes in a massive crunch. So for us, we spend an awful lot of time trying to understand, plan, analyse, predict how that might go. I'll give you some stats from New Year's Eve just gone to give you a sense of what this feels like. So on that evening, we completed 15 million trips worldwide across all of those cities. The average wait time for a car, anyone like to guess? 3 minutes, 5 minutes? It was 4 minutes across 15 million trips. And if you remember the world before Uber and what it was like trying to get a taxi on New Year's Eve, 4 minute wait time on average worldwide is pretty good. And it's only possible because we understand so much about the system and how it's moving. In terms of growth, just to give you another kind of sense of how this is changing, so Uber was founded back in 2009. We did our 1 billionth trip end of 2015. It was Christmas Eve. It was in London. It was achingly trendy. It was, I think, London Fields to Hoxton in a Toyota Prius. Like you couldn't make stuff up. We did our 2 billionth trip in June 2016, 6 months later. And actually 147 trips tied to be our 2 billionth trip because they started in the same second in different cities around the world. Now, that was the middle of 2016. You can plot the points and draw a curve and try and figure out where we are now, but it's big. Now, since we're at Codebase, I thought I'd just chuck this in. So, as well as using this technology and the platform to build out something which has been tremendously successful in terms of rides, we're also trying to open the ecosystem up. So we have on our developer sites access to our API platform. So developer.uber.com, if any of you are amazing programmers, which I hope some of you are. This is just a selection of the sorts of things that people have built on top of our ride and experience APIs. So in here is everything from Amazon Echo and Siri and this sort of thing. So Alexa, get me an Uber. Siri, get me an Uber. through to people who've built out really rich experiences that merge transportation in a city with other things that matter to people in their day-to-day lives. On the side, I pulled out one of my favorites, which is something called Hoodline. With Hoodline, it's integrated into the Uber Ride API. In their app, you can book an Uber and take a trip. But Hoodline is a hyperlocal news platform. And what they do is, while you're on the trip, they serve you up hyperlocal content about, literally down to the street that you're visiting, so that you get a really rich experience as a traveller about what's happening. You don't just read the New York Times, but you actually go all the way into the neighbourhood. That sort of stuff is possible right now. You can build some really, really cool applications. Another one that's on here somewhere is there's a suitcase. The suitcase is Bluetooth enabled and it's like super smart and Internet of Things. And what it does is when you lose your suitcase at the airport, it knows you've lost it and it calls an Uber and it goes home. Who knew you needed this stuff, right? Now, on to the more serious bit. So, we've heard a lot already about opening up this data and how do we use it to actually benefit the cities that we live in. This is a screenshot from a platform that we're building and opening up right now called Uber Movement. What Uber Movement does is it takes all of our trip data, it very carefully aggregates and anonymizes that so that we're not leaking any personal information about people's individual trips, and exposes it so that people who are making decisions about the future of cities can get a better handle on how the city is moving and what's happening. So in the beta version of the tool at the moment, you can see a screenshot here for San Francisco, and what happens is we divide the city up into zones. You can drop a pin any 2 points in the city, and then we'll tell you how long, based on all of our sensor data, it would take on average to get from point A to point B. And then you can drill in and ask the question, how does that change by time of day, by day of week, by month of year? And gradually learn about how the city is moving, and then start to build out things like simulations. So ask the question, would I want to widen a road, or not widen a road, or do a road closure, or invest more in a particular type of public transport? We can start to bring our data to bear to help answer that question in a much smarter way. And we're super excited about this and really looking forward to working with lots of cities around the world to get this to a place where it helps cities make smarter decisions off the back of data. So that's where we are so far, and I thought I'd just tell you a bit about the future, since the future is really important. When we started Uber, we didn't really think about a lot of this, right? We just wanted to have the convenience of tap a button and get a ride. But it's grown to the extent that we've learned a lot about the world, and we've come to realise that actually there's a much bigger play here in terms of making the planet a much more livable, more sustainable place, and making cities much better places to live and work. And this bit of the story starts with cars, right? So there's some cars. On the planet, there are 1.2 billion cars. 1.2 billion massive hunks of metal. And these are, for the most part, clogging up our cities, right? If you live in Edinburgh, you know the traffic is not ideal at certain times of day. And that same is true the world over. It's a hell of a lot worse in many places. So these 1.2 billion cars, I think, put out more than a fifth of the carbon dioxide that goes into the atmosphere. And the really tragic thing is we mostly drive them on our own. So if you drive a car, next time you're in it, and you stop at the traffic lights, like have a look to your left or have a look to your right, and what you will see is that probably the person next to you is also in a car that would seat 4 or 5 people on their own. That's pretty awful and pretty depressing. That is only 5% of the problem, because 95% of the time the cars are parked, hogging land space that could be much better used in a million different ways in the middle of the city. And we reckon if cities are smart about how we use technology and data, there is a better way through all of this. So how do we start to make a dent in all of the traffic that is using up the space in our cities? This is a map of London. Hopefully lots of you recognise it. And here we are. So the dots are tube stations outside of central London, and blue lines are for 1 or 2 days at some point last year, Uber trips that started or ended at those tube stations. And it's super interesting because what you see is there are a lot of people using Uber to get to or from a tube station. And it actually makes perfect sense, because what's happening is people are using public transport to do cross-town journeys that are much more efficiently done on something like the tube. and they are using services like Uber to close off the first or last mile of their trip. So you want to think about it another way. If your tram or your tube or your bus or your train doesn't go all the way to your front door, Uber will help close that gap. And this is really powerful. And when we looked at the data, we noticed this was something like a third of the trips in London are doing this, right, going to or from a tube station. And it made us realise that actually the way that we solve individual car ownership is not that only Uber exists, or not that only public transport in cities exists, but you put the two together. And with them operating together, people don't need to own their own car anymore. Which is why, off the back of this, we are now engaged in loads of projects and pilots around the world where we're working with city authorities to figure out how we put together a viable proposition for people to use ride-sharing services like Uber and the public transport that the city provides to take a lot of the traffic off the streets. And there are some great examples. There's tons on our website you can have a look at. And there's an amazing one in Summit, New Jersey, where the authorities there have decided, rather than spend a fortune on a new car park for the train station that's going around with people driving to get the train every morning, they could work with us to make a contribution towards Uber fares for people who would have driven their car, save a load of money, and not build the car park. And that's just the beginning. So part of this is how do we build those connections between these sorts of platforms and public transport. The second thing is how do we get more people in fewer cars. So another thing that our engineers noticed when we looked at data was that in lots of big cities we had this curious thing happening where there were loads of trips that had siblings. So 2 trips or more that started in roughly the same place at roughly the same time and went in roughly the same direction. And we thought, well, what if there was a way to make these 2 trips be 1 trip, or 3 trips be 1 trip? Now, carpooling is not a particularly new idea, but it's always floundered on the coordination problem. It's been too difficult in the past to do this at scale. With our mobile technology and our data analytics, we're able in real time to match trips together. So on an Uber pool trip, which you can do in London if you're in London, or you can do in Paris if you're in Paris, or wherever else, you say you want to ride on Uber pool, and then we will dynamically match you with other people going in the same direction. And if they're there, then you share the car with them, and it's a triple win because you will pay less for your trip, the driver will make more money because there's more people in his or her car, and the city will win because there's 1 less car on the road. Only possible because of the technology that we're now deploying. This has been going in London for best part of a year now, and we can count the gallons of fuel not burned, the cars not on the road, and the carbon dioxide not in the atmosphere, not causing climate change, which has got to be a good thing. So, this is going to be a real game changer, and it will come to more and more cities as we progress. And I guess that kind of takes us to the conclusion of all of this, which is what does the future look like? And how do you go even faster towards a world where people know they can get a reliable ride in minutes, they know that that will work seamlessly with public transport to get them from A to B, and where we get more people in fewer cars to take as much traffic off the road as possible. And the answer, as you probably guessed, is going to involve cars that drive themselves. You might have seen that we've got some of these testing on the roads at the moment in America. There's still the test phase, there's still lots of things they can't do. That's why there's an engineer and a human driver in the front as well. But the technology is important, and it's important because studies that we've seen suggest that if you can get this right, and you have integration with public transport, you have carpooling and you have cars that drive themselves, we can take 90% of the traffic off the roads. And if you can do that, then congestion isn't a problem, parking doesn't need to happen, and all that land that we give over to cars can be green space and affordable housing, which is what we actually want in our city centres, not ghastly swathes of concrete. So I'm going to leave it there. That's what we think the future looks like. I look forward to the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I've got 3 or 4 questions already. I'm sure others have plenty too. I think it's obviously very exciting seeing the value of the data for improved service delivery and all the benefits that you mentioned. It's also exciting to see private sector companies like Silver Springs and yourselves getting really involved in the open data movement as well. Because the sort of first wave of open data was very much focused around public sector and public data. So it's really good to see that coming through. Okay, last but not least, we have Toby. That's it, that's my introduction then. Yeah, it is. We have Toby. Toby can introduce himself. Toby's going to talk to you about USmart and what we're doing at Urban Tide to make data open.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. Thank you. Now this is a great point to talk about USmart after having seen Uber with considerable more funding than we have, I must say. But I've got maps, I've got data, so I'm not going to be able to follow this properly, but bear with me. There's only a few minutes between me and more beer and maybe some more pizza if there's any pizza left. So I just want to very briefly really talk about what we've been up to, Urban Tide, and we've been building something called USmart. A small team, we're only 7 in our startup, but we want to achieve big things, and we think that open data and data sharing is a very interesting area to be involved with at this point in time. There's a lot of organizations who really need to innovate, they really need to understand how they get more value out of their data, and we're trying to be part of that journey with our platform. So the problem really is there's valuable data everywhere, and Richie was alluding to it. People are not aware that they actually have data that other people could do stuff with. So we've got all this data sitting in silos and databases, and it's maybe used once, recorded once, used once, and then forgotten about. So we really need to help people to reuse data and make it available to communities and people who can really do something with this. And we think our platform certainly will try to achieve that. So what we do is we help you to open data, we help you to share data, and if you're inclined to do so, you can also sell data in the future. And I think that is really important that you, if you have valuable data, that you also can either return your investment, because obviously all this stuff costs money, or indeed you can monetize it as well. So here's just some examples of why that could be relevant for some organizations. So we've got Transport for London. They've opened up all their data, and they're one of the best examples really where an organization has made that decision very clearly that they want to not just hold onto all their data and provide all the solutions themselves. They felt, okay, we're very good at running this transport system, we're very good at producing timetables, we're very good at providing predictions of when the bus is going to be here or there, but we don't really want to build apps. We're not app developers, we're not designers, so all we're going to do is make that data available, and we just encourage the community to provide, and the community has provided. So 42% of all commuters in London apparently are using apps now based on the open data published by Transport for London. So they've really helped themselves and helped the people commuting through the city by not trying to solve all problems themselves. Another one, so Manchester, they are spending about £4 million a year on processing freedom of information requests. And you know, there's some indication that opening up data will either reduce or change the types of requests you will get through as an organization. So rather than saying, can you please give me all the data about this, that we might be asking much more specific questions about particular information that you already have published. So it's really helping to reduce the burden of very time-consuming FOI requests. And finally, Gartner has predicted that public sector organizations will have to or want to sell some of their information. Estimate about 20% of public sector organizations will actually start to monetize data by 2020. I think we see some examples. Copenhagen, London are trying to build data exchanges where people can, organizations can sell their data, even private sector organizations can sell data to interested parties. So I think that will be an interesting trend to watch out for. So what do we do with USmart then? So we've got really a platform that we're building to consume all sorts of data. So you've got your static reference data, you've got things that are being updated in batch form, so maybe weekly or daily, and then you've got the high frequency stuff, the real-time stuff. I mean, that's where really you can see Uber data being obviously in this bracket where you get millions of requests and data sets, new data being generated all the time. So we're consuming all this data for all these different levels of data, and then we can, through our technology, we can then either open it up completely, which is nice. So if you are keen to share all your data with everybody, that's fine. But we also want to develop the ability to privately share. So we get a lot of organizations who saying, it's all nice and good open data, but I am running a project and I want to share with this other organization, or my data is commercially sensitive, I only want to share it with my trusted partners. So that will be what then we'll be able to do that, and then obviously selling, which is kind of sharing privately with some charging attached to it, if you wish. And the way we do this is with the latest technologies. So we really trying to use stuff that's been all developed over the last few years to be a bit ahead of the game of our competitors here. I just want to show some examples. So you had a map, I have a map. So this is Edinburgh, not as exciting as Uber rides, but actually these are bins. So these are bins across Edinburgh, and you can see there's lots of them, and probably Richie can tell you much more about how they're being collected, and the waste management team, how they define their routes, etc., and what sizes the bins are, etc. So this is your typical, this is asset data, so this is largely static. You might add a bin or two every now and then, but this is not going to change very often. This is your reference data, and in fact all the stuff that's in the background is reference data as well. You've got your road network, you've got your train, you've got all that stuff, the hills, whatever. That's all reference data. This is quite static. That doesn't change very much. What you get then is you get batch related stuff. So I've got here an example from our platform. This is NHS prescribing data. So every month the NHS publishes data for all the prescriptions in Scotland, and if you add them all up, there's I think roughly 13 million. I think there might be another batch just come out which you haven't got in there. So there's 30 million records of individual prescriptions that have been released as open data, and that happens every month. So you get every month another few million on top. So that sort of accumulates slowly, and then what you have is real-time stuff. So we're at the moment productizing that into USmart. We did a pilot last year with a student from Stirling University and the Data Lab. We used Transport for London data to really see how we can capture real-time data, and that was one of the streams, one of the bigger streams we could find really of data. So they're basically predicting for all the 19,000 bus stops, the 700 bus routes, and about 8,000 buses, they're predicting every 30 seconds when they're going to be at which place. So you get about, well, more than 12 million, it says it's roughly 16 million on average per day predictions, and we were looking at the quality of those predictions. The student was doing that for us. So here we have got there's a small visualization. You can see again there's London here, and if I click here I should get a little bubbles coming up. So this is real-time streamed bus predictions, and all what you can see is just every time there's a prediction there's a green bubble appearing. What will happen over time is that you'll see some routes will appear, so the system is collecting information about these routes, and it will color them in by the how accurate that prediction is. So you can imagine they're starting about I think 30 minutes before the bus arrives, the first prediction comes in, and it will say, okay, the bus will arrive in 30 minutes. Then 10 minutes later, it will say, okay, it will arrive in 20 minutes. So it's still very accurate. But when you get closer to the time, you might get things like, okay, it should be there in 5 minutes, and 5 minutes later it says it's still 5 minutes. So the prediction gets worse, probably because of disruption in traffic, etc. And we're trying to identify some of those hotspots where the predictions are actually very poor. So we can see here about 12,000 seconds, so 20 minutes later actually the bus on that route, one of the worst ones identified in real time there. So what we were doing is basically doing two things. We're trying to do some real-time analysis on this data just to see what's happening right now. We're also collecting all this data in the background to do some more bigger analysis, which I haven't got a slide for actually here, apologies, but we were looking at really looking at patterns, because buses should be arriving at regular intervals in London. They haven't got a strict timetable, as far as I understand, they should be arriving, like say, between 7 and 11 minutes between each other, so you've got nicely spaced buses, and we did see there's a huge variation going beyond that bracket of 7 to 11 minutes, so we could prove that 3 come at once really does happen, so you wait for 10 or 15 minutes, nothing happens, and then suddenly you get 3 buses at the same time, and obviously that's not ideal. So all this shows us that obviously real-time analytics is possible, and we all know that, but we're trying to learn here. We're trying to then use that knowledge to productize this so we can start offering people functionality within our platform that supports real-time streaming, and also then sharing of this data obviously in real time. And I think that's pretty much me. So we've got some booths set up in the back, and we'll have both of our engineers at those booths. If you want to see a bit more about USmart, obviously come around, have a look. We'd obviously love your feedback. And enjoy the rest of the evening, the networking and the beer and everything else. Thanks very much.
Thank you, David. There's a bit before then, we actually needed to bring their own chair, if that's okay, for exceptional speakers. If you could bring your own chair up to our lovely platform here. Thank you very much. This is high tech in Courtways. We're good. We've got questions. Thank you very much. Well, do we have questions? That's it. Has anybody got a question from all that we've listened to for the last hour? We've got another mic, Paul, actually. There's an extra piece of pizza if you go first. There we go. Well done. Well done. Pizza for this gentleman over here. Thank you very much, James.
James Stewart from the Living Lab. I'm interested in data markets and how we price data. Now, we talked about various uses of data, but one of the points we said at Copenhagen exchanges, and then was willing to let the market fix the price. Everyone wants to say that's the price we're willing to sell it for. Now, under the different models, how we created markets for data related to city life, and are we having different prices for different types of users? How does that go forward from where we have basically almost no market? We don't have a market now to a market.
Everyone looks at me. You must have the answer. I have a version of an answer, which is that if you look at what the Copenhagen Commune are doing with Hitachi and what London have been doing, they are effectively exploring that very point. How do you create a marketplace? How do you regulate the marketplace? How do you establish what the value proposition is that people are prepared to tolerate? Because at the moment it's slightly like the Wild West. No one quite knows what people are prepared to pay. If I give a good example, the cellular phone network operators have had incredibly rich data about how we all move around cities for quite a number of years, which they've monetized at a level that for most public bodies would be too expensive. The hurdle point is far too high. So O2 can tell you where people came from, where they went to, and that's not just locally, that's internationally. So for a city like Edinburgh, that would obviously be in certain months of the year an incredibly interesting resource to have to understand how to map what services you would have to have ready. But the cost at the moment outweighs the understanding of the benefit that can be gained. So I think there is actually an interesting, the whole area of data economics, if you want to call it that, is one that I think is right for people to make what they want to make of it. Because like all marketplaces, sooner or later someone will crack and want to go first, but also over time they will reach a reasonably stable position as long as people remain with a shared sense of parity. If someone becomes overly dominant in controlling the data, which I think is a risk that some people perceive in certain organizations, then there's a trust issue about how the market will operate. So for me, I think it's a really good question, but it's one that requires research. Now, it's not that there is an answer.
No? It's a good question. I haven't got an answer.
Yeah.
So obviously we've looked into this a little bit, but we struggle with this one because there is no market at the moment. When we looked into it, there are data marketplaces, but they're very customer data focused. So if you have a customer data set, you have customer data. That can be obviously very easily marketed. There's a figure against every email, every Facebook account, people selling, buying data all the time. But how much is a bin worth? Probably not that much, but there might be someone who might want to collect the bins, and there might be models around that. But we struggle a little bit to find the real value in a lot of data that organizations are holding. But when it comes to real time, I think that thing changes. So reference data, I think, is unlikely to generate considerable revenues for anybody. It's about understanding what's happening here now in the city, or in your organization, or wherever that may be. And some organizations choose to give that data away, which is nice, or other people might want to monetize that. So, but I think having a vehicle to monetize data will be a game changer. So you mentioned, obviously, Richie, that these organizations have the data, but there isn't an established marketplace where I can just go and say, I just want this slice of information, and then you can pay £1,000 and then you have that data. I think that will probably come, but you also need to obviously have the consumers ready to want that data. And if it's only 5 councils who want to buy the data, then nobody will probably bother to create a marketplace for it. So it needs to be really a data-driven marketplace where much more business will try to make use of data that's available, and the demand needs to be there before the marketplace can really be established. But I think it will happen. Gartner says it will happen, so how wrong can they be?
Thank you, James. Another question? Get my steps up as well. Full data.
Hi. I'm intrigued by sort of data sharing. I remember way back in sort of the late 90s being involved in some data sharing initiatives, actually with Edinburgh, on the web. Is it more now about services rather than data? Are we not looking at actually providing hooks into services that others can then consume more easily?
I'll say yes and no. I think there's two things. I think increasingly we are seeing services being the way that people want to interact. So I sort of separate the arrangements for data or IT systems into almost a sort of anno domini in BC. So there are those who came after the API and those who came before it. New and emerging technologies, absolutely, it's consumption of the service, and it's about how you link all those services together. What you have as an issue is that you have lots of legacy that is not unique to local government. It's the same in banking, it's the same in insurance, where there's a huge amount of data trapped in systems where the system itself is not designed. It was a system of records, not a system of reference. So I think there's a mixed economy, if we want to think of it that way. The problem is that there's a lot of focus on the service because those are bright and shiny and people can do lots of stuff with them really quickly. But actually where a lot of the value is trapped are in the legacy systems where it is still about the data and being able to share that data, extract it. So the work that we've been supporting Toby and the guys in I suppose doing user testing. But going through that journey of what are the barriers and how will you overcome them and what problems are you going to reach as you hit the marketplace. So for me, it's both, but there's almost a line in the sand depending on when it happened.
Well, it was making me think actually about the linked part is, I suppose, the consent part of. I mean, it's linked to both the questions around, just as important as making the data available is people getting comfortable with sharing the data. And a bin analogy popped in my head actually, which was in London they had a smart bin deployment, and these smart bins were effectively bins with screens on them that could show advertising. And so the city now had a new revenue stream because it could get advertising revenue on its bins. So this was great. About 6 months after this was rolled out across the city, the bin manufacturer kind of wanted to show off their technology, so it was using Wi-Fi to get the advertising onto its bins. So what it did was it kind of tracked mobile phone MAC addresses around the city because it had a selection of bins, and then its press release just said, "We've been tracking phones with our Wi-Fi, this is great." And tabloids just picked up on snooper bins, watching you where you walk, and the city had to shut down the advertising stream within a week because of the backlash, and then that company, which was a startup, was bankrupt within 6 months. And you think, had they taken a little bit longer and maybe done a partnership with TfL to share the data with them and say, we're cutting commuter time or something, then it could have been a different story. So, just establishing the marketplace is one piece, but then actually making people feel comfortable with the whole concept of data being traded is also got to happen in parallel.
And I think that's a really interesting example, because in that case there was no consent given. Now, every public Wi-Fi node you have ever connected to and clicked the yes I agree knows stuff about you. But you have given permission. Whether you understood the permission you were giving and what rights you were giving up is a completely separate story, but you at least gave a consent at some level for information about normally your device rather than you, but in some cases you as well, to be known. So the classic is OT Wi-Fi, where they've designed a wonderful thing. You only log in once, and then every time you connect, it does it automatically. But they then know exactly where you've been and can sell that and monetize it for retailers, because they know that you turn up at Costa every 15 minutes on a particularly bad day. But you've still given consent. And I think there's a huge thing around trust, consent, and how we're using data. The sorts of stuff that Brian was talking about in terms of sensors, that's not always sensing people, or if it is sensing people, it's using that to try and add value to their experience. It's not about using that to gain some other insight, or if it was, it would need to seek consent. And that's one of the dilemmas, is that it's a bit like, smart cities, open data, these are big, broad terms that people get lost under because they sort of make them what they believe them to be. And part of what we have to do is unpack that and help people understand about services being done with them, not on them, or services being done for them, not at them.
Great, thank you. We've got a question from the back here, from Johnny.
Yeah, I was wondering if you guys could speculate on the challenges of big corporations like Uber working with local authorities like the city council, and how Uber and more technology companies are going to achieve these visions for the future.
Yeah. Who wants to speculate first? Yeah. It's a fantastic question, and the reason why we're building tools like the one that I showed you just now is because we honestly believe that if cities make better use of the data that is starting to be accumulated on platforms like ours, we can make better decisions that will benefit everybody. And it's pretty obvious, right, that if there is less traffic and a better planned transport network, services like Uber will be more efficient and will provide a better service to people who ride on them. But there will be a ton of knock-on benefits for the wider city as well. So, we kind of think the best thing to do is to start that dialogue, and I don't know where it will go, but I hope that people will approach it with an open mind, because it would be kind of tragic if companies like ours showed up and said, we'd like to be part of the conversation, and other people said, we want to go LA.
You don't have to answer, Richie. You don't have to answer. It's okay, not at all. Thank you, Johnny. Okay, we've got time for 2 more questions. Then somebody else had a thank you mute.
I want to ask about Uber using the data for tools not like the ones that we've just seen, and not using the data to help local authorities, but using the data that are available to impede local authorities from trying to do what they think is best. I think Uber and other similar corporations have got to work really hard to build that trust, and it's very nice to be here and be very forward thinking, but there is obviously a downside to what we're talking about, and I'd like to I would like to see this conversation end without that being addressed.
Okay. So was there, I heard the point, was there a particular question or?
Is there a particular example that you're trying to get?
Yeah, I was just wondering how you think Uber in particular has and will gain public trust working with local authorities.
Okay, yeah, good question. So certainly here in the UK, one of the things that people don't always realise is that we're actually a very tightly regulated business. So a lot of people are under the impression that Uber in the UK is anybody can show up and drive a car and off you go. Here in Edinburgh, for example, the way that it works is that every driver on the platform is licensed by the City of Edinburgh Council. Every vehicle on the platform has been licensed by the City of Edinburgh Council. Police Scotland have run background checks on the drivers and the owners of the vehicles. Uber itself is licensed and regulated by the council, and we cooperate pretty openly with them in terms of record keeping, assisting with investigations and a bunch of other stuff. So, my personal experience running operations here in Scotland, on that front we've actually got a very constructive dialogue. I think it's probably entirely fair to say that the sorts of technology that we have at our disposal and the way that our platform operates is very different to what regulators are often used to dealing with. And there's a lot of explanation to be done on our part, and a lot of effort goes into making sure that everybody understands how that works. And for example, there are some councils in Scotland that ask us to keep all of our records on paper, and we have a conversation with them about actually that would be an awful lot of trees to cut down, and let's figure out a smarter way to do this. I'll give you that example just because it goes to show how mismatched the regulatory environment is sometimes with the nature of operating, not just for us, but any digital business. So, it's difficult, and people don't always understand where both sides are coming from, but like I say, the best way is to have the dialogue and figure out how we get to a better place.
There's an interesting, it's not Uber related, but there's an interesting blog that the Open Data Institute have just released around the new data protection regulations coming in May, and what that means in terms of your location data. So it uses the example of Strava, and how you can sort of control your personal settings so that you've got an exclusion zone, for example, around either your house or your work. You can only share it with trusted users or with people that have signed up to try to protect all of the location-based data, especially that is available, so that you've got more control and you're getting more consent, back to Rich's point earlier about what your data is and can be used for going forward. So there's some interesting discussions to be had around that. Okay, time for one more question, and then we're done. Has anybody got one? Or are we? Yay! A final question of the night. Thank you very much.
I was just wondering if you thought that there was any weaknesses or risks in relying on all this quantitative data over traditional people's experiences and qualitative data?
That's a really good question. You have to understand that data can be used to map probability, not to tell you the truth. Is my perspective on it. Because there will always be a bias. There will be a bias in the way that you've created the thing that captures the data, and it may be a bias you're not aware of. So you're always looking at probability rather than reality, because it's an image, it's not what actually happened, it's a version of what happened. Some of that's incredibly accurate, but in other areas it won't be. So we have to remember that, and again, this is where you go from data to machine learning to automation. Every organization or every person who's using data needs to understand their risk universe that they're prepared to tolerate. And in terms of data, it's exactly, there's no different than it would be if you're asking someone a question and expecting to get the answer. You have to approach it knowing what you are prepared to give in terms of your belief in the answer that's coming back. So that's why for me it's really important to understand this is a journey of understanding, because it should never replace the intuitive or our gut, but it should actually support or reinforce that. Because no matter what single data set you provided, if you give it to 2 data scientists, they will come up with 3 different versions. It's just like any other, it's me being slightly humorous for humor's sake, but I think it's about how we put it in context. The really important thing is, what are you trying to achieve? Where did you get the data from? Are you comfortable with how it was captured? Are you comfortable with how it's being interpreted? And you almost have to explain that journey. Chris will know lots of this in terms of how Uber operates, because they will have to take those. I will now hand over to him to give his version.
Yeah, so look, for us, right, is that still working? No, that's switching off. That's still on. Well, look, I'll shout anyway. So, you don't collect all this data because, I love making the cool graphs, right, and making the maps, but it's not about that. It's about the usual thing about what's the user need and how do you use the technology to meet it. And in our world, that is about believing that everybody on the planet deserves access to safe, affordable, convenient transportation. For other companies and other organisations, it's a different sort of mission, but it boils down to, are you providing something that's of value to people, to citizens? And if the answer is yes, then absolutely right. It's not just about particular data points, but actually the ultimate test is, does it improve the experience and the outcomes for the people that we care about?
That's a nice point to end on, isn't it? Yeah. No, seriously, thank you very much. Could you just join me in thanking our panel one last time for I'd like to say thank you to you as well for the last hour and a half and for your contributions there. And then just lastly, thank you to Data Lab as well, again, for hosting the DataFest event, and obviously wish you success for the rest of the week. Thanks to our friends at Product Forge, and that's it from me really. One last shout out, thanks to the team at Urban Tide. As someone mentioned, we are only a team of 7. We're very small, but we're perfectly formed and we're highly effective. So that's not too bad, is it? And that's it from me. Please stay around, mingle with some old and some new faces, and yeah, it's been a pleasure to host you this evening, and thank you again for your time.